We need it. Oxygen. It's why we breathe.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Small Business Stories. And today we've got Brad Baldridge. He's one of the nation's leading experts in college financial planning. You may know him as the host of the podcast Taming the High Cost of College, or you may know him for his Baldridge Wealth Management Solutions or that's a mouthful. Baldridge College Solutions. We'll send all the links in the thing after. But either way, you're going to get to know him now because you probably have to start thinking about financial planning for college. And as Brad was saying earlier, we're going to get to the late stage folks. All of you folks who are all organized and dial in from the moment the child's birth certificate is signed, yeah, this podcast is not for you. We're the later stage folks, the procrastinators, the people dealing with all kinds of other stuff at the same time. Brad, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So I always try to cue up my guests, but I generally slaughter what they do. So I like to ask the first question. What are you, Brad Baldridge, really good at? Not what your business does, what you are really good at.
What am I really good at? I think I'm good at taking complex, confusing topics and boiling them down to where the average person can understand and make informed decisions based on that, you know, more simplified explanations. Or, and I, of course, do it primarily in the financial world, but I can do it elsewhere when needed, from with my kids or my family or whatever.
And that's so key because the whole financial stuff, I mean, everything from filling out the forms that you need, right, to be able to figure out, oh, okay, am I not eligible? Is my child eligible to get potential discounts on their tuition costs or get some loans? Let's just talk a little bit about the sense of overwhelm when you deal with parents at this stage, because it's going to be
Yeah,
related to the sense of overwhelm that a lot of small business owners feel when you've got all of these things to think about, especially financial pressure. So give us some context.
right. Yeah, so a lot of the people I'm working with, we're focusing on what I would call late stage college planning. So they have high schools, freshmen, sophomore, juniors, and even seniors. Now, I'm not recommending that you wait till senior year to do your college planning. Unfortunately, a lot of people do, or they find themselves stuck or have a problem, and then we have to, I call it the senior rescue plan to give you an idea of what kind of planning we do
Mhm.
at senior year, right? It's we're trying to make lemonade out of lemons at that stage. But again, ideally junior year or sooner where it's like, okay, college is coming and our student is starting to talk about college and we're going to need to visit colleges. It's real. What's actually going to happen. And then all of a sudden, all the challenges that most families start running into of I don't understand how the system works. I've had many parents that didn't do college themselves, or they went to college in a different country, which means they don't really understand the US system. And then even if you did go here in the US, it was probably 20 plus years ago. And a lot of times the rules have changed pretty dramatically. So understanding, loans and financial aid and saving and investing and negotiating with schools and the whole process, can be very overwhelming. And I think for a lot of families, because it's getting more complicated, they need to start earlier than they realize. And that will help take some of the pressure off.
I like to do myth busting up front. So, what's the biggest myth out there when it comes to financial college planning? Like you said, these parents, they're not prepared. What's the big myth? They all go in thinking X, but it's Y.
Right. I would say there's kind of a twofold around financial aid where a lot of people will say things like, well, we're not going to qualify for aid. And it turns out they will. And conversely, people thinking that, oh, we're going to get large amounts of aid. And it turns out they won't. Because the way aid works, it varies a lot depending on the family, the financials of this family, the income and assets and that kind of stuff, but also the school that you pick. So a lot of times I've seen families earning hundreds of thousands qualify for aid, and I've seen families earning 75 or 100,000 not qualify for aid. So because it's more complicated than what is your income. And it gets boiled down way oversimplified. So a lot of people say, well, my brother-in-law did get aid or didn't get aid, and therefore that's what the way it's going to work for me. But that's only true if your brother-in-law has a similar financial situation, a similar student with academics, um, similar price of colleges. All that has to be the same in order for it to be an apples to apples comparison. And usually it's not.
And how does a business owner or entrepreneur factor all this out? Because revenue streams may be unpredictable month to month or year to year, a lot of volatility and variability, one season over the next, this kind of thing. How can they best prepare? So let's give a tip. Should all of the business assets be included? Should just the business income? Do you put in an average? How do you even begin to think about this as a business owner? Because you got to focus on business, but you got to get your kid launched and get ready for college if your kid's choosing to go to college.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I guess first, a quick update. So up until about 2 years ago, small businesses were not reported on the financial aid forms. So the FAFSA did not require you to report small businesses under 100 employees, mostly owned by the family. So the typical doctors and dentists and small retail and consultants and those kind of people, none of those people had to report their business as an asset. That changed 2 years ago. So now you do have to report your business as an asset. Now, again, a lot of times a consultant, where most of their value is what they know, it's not really a business that has value potentially without the owner operator around it, it'll dry up. So that might legitimately be a no value or very low value business. But if you owned a restaurant and had real estate and an ongoing concern, you need to report that as a value. So that's one, important update for small business owners. And nobody went back to the internet and took all that bad information off the internet where so it still says in lots of places that you do not need to report a business, but that's not accurate anymore. So make sure you get updated information. Now, that being said, business owners do have a challenge because financial aid is based on income and assets. Well, now the business is an asset. Your income is variable. So it's like, well, you could plan for, and now you have to maybe plan for a range. I mean, we have business owners where we say, all right, well, in good years, our income's 100,000 and bad years, our income's 50,000. Okay, well, then we kind of have to try both on for size and do some planning around both scenarios and maybe one in the middle. Um, so it's more complicated. So business owners have to do everything that everybody else does, plus factor in, well, how does the business gonna impact things? But there's on the flip side, there's also opportunities for business. You can hire your kids into the business. I've seen situations where like a restaurant owner is paying their kids 50 or $100 to show up and work a shift, kind of cash, not really putting them on payroll and stuff. And I recommend just the opposite. Put them on payroll, pay them as well as you can. That typically reduces the parent's income because there's only so much to go around. And if you pay your kids well, then your income goes down, the kid's income goes up. But as long as the student doesn't earn more than around $11,000, it's not going to have any impact. So you could pay each of your kids $5,000, $10,000 to work in the business, and that would be a net positive, both for taxes, most likely, and for financial aid. Plus, of course, you're getting the work done.
Right. You
You
hope,
can, yes,
right?
exactly. And then you can set up tuition reimbursement plans in your business. Large companies have tuition reimbursement plans. If you go back to college while working for us, if you get an A, we'll give you 100%. If you get a B, we'll give you 70%, so forth and so on. Well, a small business can set up that same plan, and you can tell your kids, you work for me, I will reimburse you. If you get an F or better, I'll give you 100%. You can do that. It's, certainly allowed, but you have to understand that it exists. And then there's some rules, generally you want to work with your tax advisor and make sure you're crossing the T's and dotting the I's there, because in a lot of cases, the student's going to need to be 21 in order for it to work if it's parents and children. If it's uncle's business, or grandpa's business, then a lot of times it'll work even better. But there's some rules around parents giving direct benefits to their kids where, we have to, it's attribution rules essentially that we need to understand. But it can still work. And certainly it works well for grad school as well. So that's just two strategies of many that business owners can explore that the average, W-2 workers won't have a shot at.
I think this is already incredibly helpful because I'm sure I didn't know a few things of this. I'm sure a lot of other people didn't know a few of these things. And to your point, all of us, right, as small business owners and entrepreneurs, we've got to follow the rules on the finances, the taxes, all of that stuff. There are no short circuits, right? Can't do that. So one of the things you said earlier in your introduction, you talked about, oh, being able to negotiate with the schools and figure this out. Give our business owners another tip. What have you learned about negotiation, Brad? How can business owners use that when they're overwhelmed by the magnitude of the finances that's at stake, right? Talk about a
Mhm.
college tuition, a couple $100,000 minimum over a few years. Talk about the stakes, the pressure, the need, right? Everybody wants to do the right thing. And of course, you want to help your kid, you want to help your business, all of that. How do we negotiate effectively? What have you learned?
Right. So I guess first of all, negotiating is not your typical negotiation, right? Where my lawyer is going to beat up your lawyer and we're going to work this out. That is not at all what we're talking about. It works a lot differently in the college process. It's much more of a, can you help us? And ideally, it's your student, asking for help. And then parents are there for backup as far,
Right.
because again, a lot of students don't know the family finances well enough that they can answer all the questions. But the gist of it is at a lot of schools now, there's variable pricing based on, again, need-based aid and merit aid, where sometimes it's based on the academics of the student, sometimes it's based on finances. And for a lot of colleges now, there's a little bit of aid out there for, well, how much do we have to get you in order for you to come? So you're not willing to pay full price, but if we gave you another 10,000, would that, you know, bring you in? Because that's the reality at a lot of colleges where most colleges are offering discounts. The average discount is about $20,000 now at a private school. And it can be much greater than that. Obviously, some don't get much of a discount. So on the other end, some are getting $40,000 and $50,000 off. So for the right students in the right situations, there's, there's certainly a large number of scholarships or discounts. Now, some colleges have kind of taken that to the point where they are now using, just like every other business, trying to use their technology to figure out, well, if we have an extra $50,000 that we could give to families, what's best? Should we give $10,000 to 5 kids or 25,000 to 2 kids? And they're tracking their people coming to the website, they're tracking who accepts and who doesn't, and they're trying to make informed decisions with this. And they might come to the conclusion that if we offer five $10,000, two or three will come. We don't know exactly which ones, but and that's what that's good for us for whatever reason. Whether it's more profit or better students or so that's the other side of it, right? Is when you're negotiating with the colleges, sometimes they're looking just to fill seats. Sometimes they're looking for very specific students, and you'll never really know what's driving them to, participate in the negotiation if they participate. And then again, in many students and many situations, there really is no negotiation, right? You say, well, is there anything else? No, that's our best and final offer. Take it or leave it. And, you know, that's, the other side of the coin, of course. But in a lot of cases, if you go back and ask, and then of course, certainly there's the special needs and fringe situations, right? Where there certainly is a large and intentional ability to, renegotiate if your business is in tough times, right? If your business was in a hurricane zone or one of the fire zones recently or something like that, where yeah, it looked like I have good income, but that business is gone. It burned up last week. Okay, well, now you definitely have the right to go back and appeal the process and ask for additional aid and that type of thing, and they will probably take you seriously, especially if you're in an official disaster zone or there's, hard documentation of a disability, a death, a divorce, substantial business problems or changes, bankruptcies, all that kind of stuff is definitely grounds to, work with the colleges and see if they can, help you out with more aid and more loans, more different programs and so forth.
Let's bring this in and around again back to small businesses because a lot of this relates to a few key, I guess, commonalities. One, the conundrum of choice, right? You could go to any college, community college, associate, this, that, degree level. You've got
Mhm.
options, right? You don't have to stay in the US. You can leave, you can go internationally. So, conundrum of choice, that's also something a lot of business partners and business owners face. Like, do I do this? Do I do that? Then there's the pressure, right, to get it right and figure out, is this one going to have the highest ROI if I go down this path or this path? And sometimes you don't have that luxury of experimentation. So,
Mhm.
what have you learned with college financial planning that you can parlay to the business owner in the context that I've just described, Brad?
Right. Yeah. So for a lot of people, if you just think about what it looks like at the end. So at the very end of the process, your student applied to 5 or 10 colleges and they were accepted to some of them or all of them or a couple of them or whatever it is. So now you're in the final stages and the family is having meetings around, okay, well, we got these two at net 25,000 and these two net 35,000 and this one at net 45,000 and this outlier over here at 84,000. And if you're lucky, your favorite school, first of all, your students and parents agree as to what the best school is, whatever that means, if you're lucky. And also, the favorite one is the lowest cost one. And then life's a little easier, right? But in a lot of cases, it's like, well, I like the $55,000 school a lot more than the $25,000 school. And then is it worth it? It's same could be said around, buying a car, let's say, another big ticket item. Some people will spend large amounts of money on a vehicle and somebody else will judge them and say, oh, that car's not worth it. Well, obviously it was worth it to them because they did it. And college is kind of a similar thing. Some people will spend 50 or 100,000 per year on college. Some people think that's crazy and they'll only spend, 25. Now, there has to be a dose of reality. Just because you don't want to spend any money on college, it doesn't mean you're going to be able to find free college either, especially as your income and assets climb. A typical business owner that's got some reasonable success is now expected to help the kids. And unfortunately, and as much as you'd love to say, well, I'm just not paying, well, then your student's not going in a lot of cases. Um, they kind of use a little leverage on you and force you to participate. But that being said, do you need to spend 45 or is there another choice? Probably, right? And where I help families a lot is understanding what it's going to cost before you apply earlier in the process. There's 6 types of colleges out there, broadly speaking. Not every college lands in a nice, neat bucket, but there's 3 different kind of private schools, 3 different kinds of public schools, and they each have their own, as an example, Harvard and Yale and the very high-end schools. They don't offer any merit aid. You've got to be an academic rock star to get accepted. But once you're accepted, the only aid you're going to get is need-based aid. So I've had families come to me and say, well, my kid is so smart. He got into Harvard and so forth and so on. But this college gave, a $30,000 merit award in Harvard or Carleton or whatever, pick a number of high-end schools, didn't offer any merit aid. And it's like, well, they never offer merit aid. You should have known that. And then they get real frustrated because a lot of times if your income is, say, 300, 400,000, which we see a lot of business owners have that type of income. And sometimes it's even phantom income. That's another interesting thing is where business owners' tax returns have big numbers on it, but they say, wait a minute, I'm reinvesting into the business and stuff. So although it shows up on my taxes as income, I don't get to spend it. It's going back in the business. And same problem though. And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, Harvard says no, you get no aid. But you should have known that going in. A similar school down the street, maybe not quite as prestigious, does offer merit. And if you're an academic rock star and you get accepted to these high-end schools, you can probably get top awards at a lot of other schools So, is it worth it? Now, I've just scared a bunch of people away from the
Right.
high-end schools. But on the other end of the spectrum, Stanford had a press release that said if your income, if your AGI is below 100,000, then Stanford is free. No tuition, no room and board. They pay for it all. If your income's between 100 and 150,000, they'll cover all of tuition and maybe you'll pay some towards room and board. So now all of a sudden, Stanford, again, great example. If your income is relatively high, it's going to be pricey. If your income is middle income, well, then a lot of times it's going to be relatively low cost. So just because again, going back to the how did it work for your brother-in-law? Well, again, you need to understand the differences and how they apply to you. And then we have the business owners where I've seen a few business owners where they have kind of feast and famine. You know, one year their income will be 600,000 because in the case that I saw, it was a lawyer. When I win a couple of cases in the same year, my income that those years might be, hundreds of thousands higher than in the years when I'm just prepping those cases and they haven't actually gone all the way through the process yet because it's a 1 or 2 or 3 year process where, some years lots of lawsuits pay out and some years very few pay out. And he had that up and down and it was hard to deal with. And with college, it was another challenge of, well, what are you going to put up in the years that matter for college? Well, we don't know yet. Okay. So we got a plan.
And as you were saying that, I was thinking of my stepson who had a full ride at a college in the Midwest, but chose to go to one of the most expensive schools in the country with no ride. Yeah.
Yes.
Like,
Right.
glad I'm not paying that bill because, yeah, that's just, it's how it goes. Now,
Yes.
we'll just flip things around a little bit here. I like to give folks that are not dialed into our YouTube midlife success getting the visual experience, the ones that are just getting the auditory experience through iHeartRadio, Spotify, Apple, wherever they're listening from. Describe
Mhm.
it. I'm looking here at your background, and you've got Ernie the Muppet, who's one of my favorite puppets there in your background, and some books and a globe. How do you want to describe yourself, Brad? What are folks seeing? Give them the vibe.
As far as me, what I look like physically, I don't understand the question.
Yeah, that your room and your thing, like it just we try to give people a sense for what they're looking
Yeah.
at, what they're hearing, so they can dial into it.
Yeah, I'm just an old guy that I look like I work with numbers, right? My daughter would tell you how unfashionable I am and a little uncouth I am, but I understand the basics and I don't understand the young people as well.
There you go. That's actually really funny. Like I appreciate you just being and you going out there. This is what it's about, right? You just want to say, what are people listening to? And I'm in my living room, which has actually the best acoustics, although the odd dog bark, does get involved here. But it's, I'm trying to wear a bright color today to pop because it's Monday that we're recording, and it's just blah. All right, let's
Mhm.
let's move along to a couple of other things. So when business owners, and we think about that and what we need to know and what you've learned, operating Baldridge Wealth Management and Baldridge College Solutions, there's a lot that comes, you come through it by experiencing it. If
Mhm.
we pulled all that back and said, oh, okay, what lessons should business schools and should all these accelerators and startup boot camps be teaching entrepreneurs, but they're not? What are the lessons being missed, Brad?
Wow. Um, I mean, I think in general, they're a little behind the times and, the latest marketing and, I feel like and college planning and all this stuff, it's, you know, it's not talked about hardly anywhere other than the people that are actually going through it. So, and I don't know what the solution to that is, but I think most business owners, when you're hiring someone out of college, you kind of know whatever they learned is probably a little stale, especially in something that's moving quite a bit. And I think college would be an example of something that's been changing the last few years with COVID, with the changes in financial aid, with um, there's been a number of shifts. And of course, now with the politics going on around the high-end schools and, I've had people ask me, well, what's going on with the Department of Ed? Are things going to change? And it's like, well, we don't know for sure what's going to happen. Um, so far, it's mostly business as usual, but that could change on a dime, I guess, and depending where things are going. But I think that's probably the biggest thing is one more hat to wear that has never come up is, planning for college for your children and understanding how all that works and using college as a benefit in your business, setting up tuition reimbursement plans or some states offer benefits around their 529s for businesses, and understanding all that interesting things that can be done. And again, it's all on the fringes where most people haven't spent the time to figure it out or deal with it.
And then there's a lot of complexity by the time you get to be our age, because again, for those not having the visual experience, Brad and I, we look about the same age. And when you've got kids in college, you're not 20, right? And
Right.
so, as you were saying earlier before we joined the podcast, there's added complexity when you start to talk about inheritance, maybe through a deceased parent. You talk about the complexities already. You've spoken about having businesses and having those assets and where they're brought in and all those changes now. Where, what should parents really do and business owners do when they start to get confused by so much of this stuff? And there's so much misinformation out there. I know you've got some resources that people can get to. Can you talk to our folks how they can get help
Yeah.
from you?
Yeah. So I've got my website, tamingthehighcostofcollege.com, and also a podcast by the same name, wherever podcasts are sold, of course. Um, has a lot of good information. We got a lot of free resources and that type of thing. And what what if you are around kids that are growing up, it seems like, you blink your eyes and they go from kindergarten to starting high school, and you blink again and then they go off to college, and then you blink again and college is over, right? My oldest just graduated from college and it went very fast. My youngest is graduating from high school this year. So I've been eating my own cooking, as they say, where I'm actually having to do it. And it's an extra challenge, right? Because to my kids, dad still doesn't know anything when it comes to college.
Of course not.
Um, so there's always that challenge. But I think a lot of families need to understand that you need to start earlier than you realize, especially because, again, get into the technicalities of how financial aid works. It's based on your income and assets, and they look back a couple of years for your taxes. So ideally, freshman, sophomore year for business owners, where you start saying, well, because I'm a business owner and I can control my income, if you had a high school graduate, like my daughter graduated right now in 2025, the first financial aid that she receives is based on 2023 income. So I needed to plan my 2023 income in 2022, which is, freshman year of high school. And if you're a business owner and you actually have the luxury of saying, some business owners can go to their accountant and say, I want my income to be lower this year. And if we have to make the year prior to that higher in order to make that one lower, let's go ahead and do that because that'll help me with financial aid. But you got to plan well ahead for that. And for a lot of business owners, what happens, I think, is the first student is kind of the guinea pig. And then you realize, oh, all these things I could have and should have done. Well, at least we'll get that for the second and third. And that's certainly the way it works for a lot of areas for, with our family, right? The oldest, you don't know what you're doing. You try something, you say, oh, that didn't work. I had to do something different for the next two. But starting early, I think, is the key for business owners. And then as you layer on more complexity, right? So the very basic college plan would be just a basic W-2 wage earner sending their kid to the local state school or community college or something relatively low cost, relatively simple. You start adding in complexities of we're going to go out of state. We're looking at high-end schools. We want to go to Harvard or Yale. We've got strong academics so we can get scholarships. So there's that layer of complexity. Then on the parent side, there's, divorce and blended families get more confusing, and business ownership and inheritances, or having grandma and grandpa help out, or multi-generation businesses and that kind of stuff where, there's lots of planning that can be done. Athletics is another one where if the student wants to play a sport in college, and if you start saying, well, I'm a business owner, my kid wants to play a sport in college, I've received an inheritance, and we want to go to high-end schools. Well, exactly. You've got them all, right? You've got everything going on all at once.
Your head blows
And
up. Yeah,
exactly. Um, Seems overwhelming, but on the flip side, if you go look at a college campus, it's full of college kids. So eventually they figure it out and it happens, right? But it can be very stressful, from a parent-student dynamic of, do I have to nag them about this and how are we going to do this and all that kind of stuff. It can be very stressful I have a lot of parents that feel responsible for college, right or wrong. I mean, and they're trying to say, well, now I didn't do what I needed to do, and now we're behind and it's my fault. Therefore, I'm just going to sign up for the big loans to solve the problem. And while that works in some regards, it's not a great plan. So um, you need to do your planning and as best you can. And a lot of times it can make you know, at least a marginal difference. And a lot of times it can, make a dramatic difference just by, choosing the right schools or the right loans or the right investments, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of levers to pull, and just understanding all the opportunities and well as some of the pitfalls is important for most families.
absolutely. And so if I take all that you just said and parlay that to small business world, one, you need to be planful, right? Planning earlier is better. Two, you need to
Mhm.
take shots on goal. And that first shot, as we talked about, may not hit the mark, but you need to learn from it so that you can prepare and take a more data informed and structured approach to the second shot you take on goal. Is that fair as a takeaway? Is anything else that you want to add as a takeaway for our business owners?
Yes. And then, and again, a lot of the services and planning that I do helps people, make the first shot the right shot instead of, because we can do a what if instead of saying, this is what happened and I regret it. We can say, well, this is what's going to happen and you're going to regret it. So let's not do that, right? We can plan ahead. We know what Harvard's going to cost. We know what the state school is going to cost, and we can put it out there earlier so that, typically, mom and dad want to talk amongst themselves for a little bit and say, well, really, should we spend 30,000 or 50,000 or 100,000 per year per student? What's the right number in our situation? And, so again, the information's out there. It's just complicated and to figure it out. Similar to a lot of other things business owners deal with, right? Taxes, et cetera. It's not that you can't figure it out. It's just you got to find the right experts sometimes, or just put the time in.
Right. Ask for help. So, as we're coming to the end of our podcast here, I always ask my guests the signature question of the podcast. If we looked into your closet, Brad, and there was a pair of footwear, boots, shoes, something, or baseball caps, hats, something that represents who you are, and that is your go to, your signature. So, you're like, yeah, I wear these shoes because they make me feel like whatever, they personify who you are. Can you tell us what we're looking at?
Wow.
It's a
Um,
fun question.
yes, exactly. I would have to say it's probably that worn out old t-shirt, the comfort shirt that, I've had it for years. I still like it. It's unfortunate that it's looking pretty ratty, but I don't really want to give it up. I think that's, might be a analogy for kind of where I'm at of, been doing this for years and um, enjoy it. And it's more fun than work. And, it's not the stuffy business shirt and that kind of stuff.
There you go. See, there's, like I said, everybody has a different answer. I love it. So, with that, Brad Baldridge, Taming the High Cost of College.com, Taming the High Cost of College podcast. Listen to it, listen for it. Just in this half hour here, we've had incredible insights from Brad. If you are a business owner and planning for your child in college, all kinds of stuff, and you can go hit him up for way more information. Brad, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
And how about that fantastic intro by Touch Circle?